Illustrator's talk for the Women in Comics show at the Society of Illustrators. Our talk this evening is called Reclaiming the Legacy of Women Cartoonists. My name is Rob Salkowitz. I am a writer on arts, popular culture, media, and entertainment for Forbes. I also teach at the University of Washington in the communications graduate program. And I've written some books, and I am proudly a contributor to Kim Munson's terrific new book on comic art in museums. It is my great honor.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It's my great honor to be participating in this conversation and facilitating this great talk between two eminent comic scholars. If I may introduce our two panelists. So Trina Robbins is a retired underground cartoonist and current comics historian. She's been writing novels, comics, and graphic novels and books for almost half a century on projects ranging from Wonder Woman and the Powerpuff Girls to her own teenage superheroine, GoGirl. She's won an Inkpot Award, was inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame at San Diego Comic-Con International. And she lives in her moldering 100-year-old house with her cat, shoes, and dust bunnies.
It's 110 years old now.
120 years old.
110.
Her autobiography, Last Girl Standing, was published by Fantagraphics in 2017. Please welcome Trina. Great to have you.
I am happy to be here.
Our other guest this evening is Kim Munson, who is the editor of the groundbreaking anthology Comic Art in Museums, which I had mentioned before, just came out from University Press of Mississippi, and it's the first academic book to explore the legacy and the history of exhibiting comic art in a museum situation. She has curated this show on women in comics at the Society of Illustrators, and has also curated other shows, including Dual View, Labor Landmarks of San Francisco, and On Reflection, the Art of Margaret Harrison. So please welcome Kim Munson.
Hey, hi everybody.
I'm sorry, this is lame. It's the times we live in, and we're doing this virtually. We would much rather be facing all of you in the beautiful Society of Illustrators environment and have you experience all of this stuff firsthand. As it is, we will be sharing with you some highlights from the exhibition. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have Kim and then Trina sort of talk through some of the highlights of the exhibition in a presentation. Then we're going to have an open conversation about some of the issues that this exhibit raises about the place of some of these women cartoonists in the canonical history of comic art and what it means to exhibit these artists in this context. And hopefully we'll have time at the end for some Q&A. What we're going to do is ask you to contribute your questions to the chat channel, and I'll keep an eye on that. And then when we get to the end, we have that opportunity for a conversation, I will turn to that. So let me start sharing a screen here, as we do these days. I hope everybody can see that. This is the Reclaiming the Legacy of Women Cartoonists. And this is a shot from the exhibit. And I guess I would just turn it over to Kim now to sort of talk us through what does this exhibit look like? What are the dimensions and the collections in it? And then we're going to walk you through sort of individual slides where you can call out some of the contributors and pieces. Take it away, Kim.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So if you're familiar with the Society's main gallery, it's 2 floors. The first floor has about 90 pieces from Trina's collection, going through the history of women cartoonists from about 1911 with Nell Brinkley all the way through underground comics in the 70s. Trina will talk about that in a couple minutes. Downstairs, we have work from 20 different contemporary artists. I tried to show kind of a wide range of different genres and include a lot of different voices and like different generations. So Rob, if you do the first slide there. We have some of the four mothers of women's comics: Joyce Farmer, Lee Mars, Willie Mendez. We also have some underground cartoonists from Trina's collection, some of her own work, and Julie Good Vibes. Go on. In the 70s and 80s, there was a second wave of women cartoonists that are all of this work is from the last year or so. Mary Fleener, Fiona Smith, and Carol Tyler. Carol Tyler has some really amazing pieces. She likes to work with found objects. So aside from comics pages, we have a comic story that's etched into saw blades. And we also have a comic story that's with panels and everything that are etched into strips of found wood from her house. We were blessed with a lot of Eisner winners this year. The panel that I'm doing next Monday, I'll actually be talking to Colleen Doran and Emil Ferris about their Eisner winning works. Linda Berry just won the Rubin Award for Cartoonist of the Year, so we're really honored to have her.
Of course, we had Emil on that terrific panel that we did at Comic-Con a couple of years ago talking about comic art in museums as well. So just
yeah, Emil is very much, she just did an artist residency at the Louvre that was amazing, but if you've seen her book, everybody's favorite thing is Monsters. The Art Institute of Chicago is like another character in the book. She renders the paintings so well and gets a lot of the underlying meaning, and it's very strong and passionate drawing. I just love her work. And then Colleen has this like gorgeous work in the collaboration with Neil Gaiman, Snow Glass Apples. I got this piece. There are actually a lot of pieces that kind of deal with different aspects of sexuality in the show. So here we have the lovers. There are some stories from Drawing Power, the anthology that just came out about women dealing with sex and sexual assault and rape and those kind of topics. In the previous slide, we had Fiona Smith, who did a children's book. The center piece there did a children's book called Sex is a Funny Word, that's actually supposed to help people understand sex and sexuality.
Feel free to jump in, Trina, if you have something to add also.
Oh, I'm just studying these because it's killing me that I can't be at the show to see that.
Yeah. Here's more bestsellers. Jen Wang did The Princess and the Dressmaker, The Princess and the Dressmaker, which was a huge young adult seller. Ebony Flowers just won an Eisner for Hot Comb, and she's going to be on the panel next week. That's a fascinating project. Tilly Walden won an Eisner for Are You Listening, which is a gorgeous book.
And some of this stuff is so beautiful in reproduction. To see the originals must be very inspiring.
Oh, they're beautiful. I mean, it broke my heart when I came to hang the show at the beginning of March, and we were open for like 2 days and then had to close because of COVID. And the few people that came those first couple days, I had great conversations with them, but then, you know, I'm just glad that people can see it now. Creota Wilberg is doing graphic medicine, which is like stories about medicine, body functions, different illnesses, like any kind of medical topic. She's also embroidered some of her comics on with needlework. And we have in the display like 3 pieces of her embroidery where she embroidered like cells from a microscope slide and different things like that. Then I'm honored to have Anne Telenase in the show, who has an incredible selection of editorial cartoons from the last year or so, plus a strip that she does. She's just absolutely, editorial cartoonists absolutely amaze me by the way that they kind of get the essence of whoever it is so quickly, how you can identify sort of the underlying part of the story just through a few quick sketches. I mean, it's just amazing talent.
Well, she certainly seems to have captured her subject in that example we're showing her.
We have a lot of really amazing young artists that are great storytellers. The first one there, Trinidad Escobar, we're going to be talking to on the panel next week. This is part of her story for Drawing Power. You can see there's some violence going on there. Margot Farrick does like really kind of wild stories that are kind of about like domination, you know, like there's a dominant and a subordinate in all of these stories. And they're usually like cats and clowns and like kind of odd characters, but the drawing in them is just like absolutely amazing. And then Gabriel Bell, we have actually the story we're showing for her is in black and white. Her drawing is very small and detailed. This particular story is called My Prince, and it's a whole fantasy about her meeting a homeless man and her imagining like saving him and rescuing him. And, you know, they go through like a whole spiritual enlightenment and get married and on and on. You know, it's a great story. What? We have Summer Pierre. This page is from her book about the blues, all the sad songs and how blues and jazz inspired her. I think that she has an event at the Society coming up in the next week or so on her own, where she'll be talking about her work. And then Noelle Franklin, I'm sad to say, actually passed away like during the interim period here while the show was closed, and that was a great loss of a talented person. We're showing a short story that she did about a nightmare that she had about crows, where crows invade her dreams, and then they wake up in the morning and crows had attacked her boyfriend's car and pooped all over.
Kim,
yeah.
Was it COVID?
No.
What killed her? It wasn't.
It was
with depression.
I think it might have been a drug overdose.
Ah.
She is from Seattle, which is where I'm from, and she's a fixture on the local comic scene here for a long time. She did a lot of illustrations for music magazines. She did a great series commemorating some of the like clubs in Seattle that are no longer in business that we grew up with in the 80s and 90s. So she, yes, very, very much missed. And I know that she was very proud to be exhibited as part of this.
Yeah, I had a lot of conversations with her. She was really, originally when we produced this show, we were planning that in April we would have Mocha Fest, and 6 or 7 of the artists were coming to do an artist panel, and there was going to be a spotlight on Trina and all of that stuff. And, you know, we never got to meet up, and now that
Noelle, I should mention, was very proud of her Native American heritage, and a group that's not often well represented in the world of comics and the arts, and I think that she was especially proud to represent as part of this show as well.
Go on. We have some comic artists. Here's Colleen Doran again. Her Wonder Woman is the mural that's at the entry of the exhibit. We also have Alethea Martinez, who is going to be participating in the talk next week. She did a free comic for DC Comics about the Central Park birdwatching incident. And then there's Afua Richardson, who's just an amazing cover artist.
That's funny that you introduced these as comic artists, when I think what you meant to say was superhero artists. Yeah. And it goes to the fact that we, you know, in the popular imagination, that, you know, we tend to equate comics and superheroes, even now, many, many decades after it's been established, that there's so much more going on in here. But it's good to see these artists represented in this show, but surely the main focus of your curation shows the wide scope of what's going on in the comics world. Before I turn it over to Trina, can you just kind of fill us in on what were you thinking, and what was the basis of your curatorial decision making? What were some of the through lines and stories that you were trying to tell through this selection?
Well, part of it was driven by the actual gallery space. We assumed that the whole top floor would be Trina's collection. And then once I started talking about the space downstairs, I started thinking about artists, and narrative is so important in comic shows because, they're stories. So I figured if I showed 4 pieces from each artist, that would give a chance to have like a short story, or like, enough material that the viewer could really get a feel for what that artist's work was in terms of like scale or whatever sort of dominant message they had. So once I decided on 4 pieces for each artist, basically we had room for 20 artists. And it was tough to pick. I mean, there were a lot of people that I really wanted in the show, and I was like, oh God, are these people too similar? And, it was like very, 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 it was a difficult choice. I mean, if I had a wing of the Met, I could have like, everybody that's worthy. But, I tried to really make sure that, there was a diversity of voices, and that I showed more than just a few bestsellers. I wanted to make sure that I covered kind of a range so people could get an idea of the kind of production that women are into now, because, it used to be, women illustrators were just doing like Ladies' Home Journal or something. And now, women are doing everything. I wish I had more room for comic strips, or for, I wish I could have included ElfQuest or like some of the other things, but I think that the work that's in the show is great, and a really good representation of sort of, the range of production by women right now.
It's a good problem to have many, many, many more.
Well, hopefully, there will be more shows.
To be sure. So Trina, first of all, give us an introduction. So these are pieces from your own collection. How long have you been collecting, and what are you sharing as part of the show?
I have been collecting original art by early 20th century women cartoonists since the mid-'80s, which was when I produced my first book on women cartoonists, Women and the Comics, which I co-wrote with Catherine Ironwood. That first book, it was groundbreaking because no one had ever written a book about, in fact, when Kat and I used to tell people we were working on a collection about women cartoonists, they would very snidely say, oh, that will be a thin volume. And that's because, of course, nobody knew how many women there had been who drew comics. And that is because all of the comics historians up until then had been men. And when men write about comics, they are not interested in the women. They write about Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Spider-Man and Batman. And of course, what we uncovered and what I have been uncovering since then is hundreds and hundreds of very talented, successful women who drew comics in the 20th century, in the early 20th century.
So in this show, when we were having our conversations leading up to this presentation, we talked about how, in certain ways, this is a response to a previous show called Masters of American Comics.
2005.
Exhibits that very much that tendency that you were talking about. Can you elaborate a little on that?
Sure. That was a show that had absolutely no women at all represented in it. And that became the canon, I guess is what they call it. Well, I say throw out that canon and start anew, because I don't think that, well, I'm not going to name names, but there was a male cartoonist who is extremely important, and I think is extremely good, deserves his fame, who was connected with this exhibit, Masters of American Comic Art. And I have it from a woman, an alternative woman cartoonist, who was at a talk he gave where she stood up and asked him, but what about the women cartoonists? You're not talking about women. And he said, there were no cartoonists drawing comics in those days. He said that. So we have to toss out that canon and start again.
I mean, as somebody that was raised internalizing that canon and reading the male-centered comics histories and being a guy myself and having those interests, you know, I was guilty of not knowing about a lot of these things.
Well, how could you know about it if no one wrote about it? Listen, if my big, really, my big epiphany when doing all my research has been, if you're not written about, you're forgotten. So these women were forgotten, but they're not forgotten anymore because I've written my books about them. And I have the largest collection of comic art by early 20th century women in America. I don't know about the whole world, but in America. And that's because the guys were not interested in collecting art by women. So great. It was this all wonderful art by women that I was able to afford. But Kim.
So I want to give Trina credit for, you know, we talk about the importance of exhibits. Trina's exhibiting of her collection all over the world has really helped bring recognition to women cartoonists. I wanted to point out that this graphic that says she draws comics, Trina actually counter-programmed Masters of Comics in New York by having her own show with pieces from her collection at the Comic Art Museum in New York at the time, concurrently, and you spoke at the museum, right?
Oh yes, of course. I even brought with me some Golden Age women cartoonists, Valerie Barkley and Lily Renee. Valerie, I'm afraid, is no longer with us, but Lily Renee turned 99 this May. And
wow.
Speaking of hopes and prayers, all of my hopes and prayers are with her that she will make 100.
No doubt. So what I was going to say also is that your recent book on the women cartoonists of the 20s was a real eye-opener, because not only are these women have been neglected from previous conversations, but their work is so iconically representative of what we think of as 1920s culture that there's no reason for these to have been forgotten either culturally or aesthetically. And so to be able to see some of these works presented is really eye-opening. Let's take a look at a few, and maybe you can introduce.
Again, I have to comment that the reason they were neglected is because nobody wrote about them. It's really so simple. Okay, this isn't, you don't have anything, do you have any Faye King?
On the next slide.
I know you have Faye King.
Yeah. So she's on the next slide. So we've got...
Oh, okay. So this isn't quite in order, folks, but the very first one is Nell Brinkley. And Nell is not the first woman cartoonist of note, but she sure is important. The very first woman to draw a comic that I was able so far to find out is Rose O'Neill, who drew a comic in a magazine called Truth Magazine, which seems to have published a number of women. And she drew this comic in 1896. And I would kill to have the original of that one, but God knows what happened to it. But this is from 1911, and Nell Brinkley was certainly incredibly important. I would never call any of them the most important, but certainly one of the most important cartoonists of the 20th century. And her work is exquisite, of course, and it was widely collected. Women, and especially young women, teenagers, even young girls, would cut her stuff out of the newspapers. She was in the Hearst newspapers. They would cut her stuff out of the newspapers and paste them in scrapbooks and sometimes color them in very carefully. I have some very nice colored pieces from various scrapbooks.
Well, it defined a look. I mean, a Brinkley girl was a thing in the 20s. I mean,
Yeah.
people
Oh
knew
yeah, there
what
were
you
actually
talking about.
three popular songs written about the Brinkley girl in the teens.
We're showing some of the sheet music in the show.
Okay. Oh, good. Yes, great. Okay. This is Faye King, who drew through the teens and the 20s and adorable stuff. This is her own cartoon of herself here. I'm sorry, that's my phone in the distance. Forgive it. It'll stop. The way she drew herself was kind of like olive oil, but pre-olive oil, because Thimble Theaters starring Popeye and olive oil had not even started yet, but just very, very cute stuff. And over here, we were talking about the flapper cartoonists. This is Flapper Fanny, 2 Flapper Fanny dailies by Ethel Hayes, who was amazing, was certainly one of the most deco cartoonists of her time, and just exquisite stuff. People look at her stuff and they go, oh, this is so beautiful. Why didn't I ever know about her? How come I never heard of her? Well, you never heard of her because nobody wrote about her. Let's have the next. Okay, we've gotten into the 40s here. That was quick. I'm going to see if closing the door will silence that phone.
Well, I'll just say while Trina's gone,
Here.
we have a whole story of Camilla, Queen of the Jungle in the show. I think it's 6 pages or 8 pages. It's absolutely beautiful, gorgeous animals, very cinematic looking. It's just gorgeous.
She was an amazing artist. We have progressed very quickly from the teens and 20s to the 40s here. And I would say that, oh my God, I'm really sorry. Okay. I would say that the 2 most important periods for women cartoonists at that point were the 20s and the 40s. And that was a period, both the 20s and the 40s was a time when women felt especially strong and proud. In the 20s, they had just gotten the right to vote, and it was revolutionary for them. And it's expressed in their work. They feel that they've gotten there. They feel that they can do anything boys can do. Of course, they weren't right. You know, they had no idea that sexism was going to go on, but this was their feeling, and it was a step forward, and it was a revolution. And then, of course, the 40s was when America went to war, and the whole feeling that Rosie the Riveter image, we can do it. Women really had it, and they were, you know, the men were off to war, and the women took their place, and they were doing it all. They were working in the factories, they were building the ships and planes, flying the planes even, and they were drawing the comics, plus the guys were off at war. And again, you've got this really wonderful, strong feeling, and they're doing strong women, jungle girls, superheroines, courageous, beautiful women. And this is Tarpey Mills. This photo is Tarpey Mills, who drew the first, well, I would consider her the first important major costumed action heroine, Miss Fury. I wonder if you have a better picture of Miss Fury than this.
I do. I'll put it up. I'll put it up at the end because
this is from an unpublished work. I'd like to show Miss Fury.
Yeah, I will. I'll put that up toward the end because
okay, great.
Sorry about that.
Great.
But one thing I would observe here is it looks like that we've moved from in the 20s that the women were working in magazines and sort of illustrate the world of illustration, syndicated comic strips, things like that. And now we're in the world of the commercial comic book industry, which was quite a different animal and quite a different social environment.
Really both, because Miss Fury ran in newspapers for about 11 years, well, 10 years, I think. And it was reprinted, timely, which is the comic publisher that became Marvel, timely reprinted the strips in comic form. So a lot of these women were still doing art for the newspapers and the comic books. And see, again, the 40s, look at Girl Commandos. This is Jill. You know, look at these women. It's fantastic. She has a little United Nations group of action heroines all banded together, Girl Commandos in their cute little uniforms, fighting the bad guys, fighting the Nazis, fighting the Axis. And her art is so energetic. I mean, look at that splash panel. And then down here with her face hidden, I wonder if this can go a little down further so we can actually
this one is oddly cropped. I'm sorry. I'll put this one up as well after.
Okay, because this is the Blonde Bomber, and that was drawn by Barbara Hall, and she's great. She's a photographer, a newspaper photographer, and of course also while she's at it, she's fighting the Nazis and the bad guys. And these women they starred in their own strips. They weren't Lois Lane. You know, they didn't need a guy to rescue them. So go on. Can we go on?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we're on
Okay,
to.
this is very important. Brenda Starr, this is Brenda Starr, who started in 1941. And she really, you might consider her, again, she appeared in newspapers. I consider her the first real action heroine. She was a girl reporter, and she had exciting adventures, much more so than Lois Lane, because she was her own heroine. She didn't have to get rescued. I love Brenda Starr. Dale Messick told such a great story. And this started in 1941. So you can see it's all concurrent with the war. This is Lily Renee. Lily Renee is amazing. As you heard me say, she just turned 99. She was a refugee. She was a talented Jewish artist, teenager, when the Nazis marched into Vienna in 1939. And she escaped, actually 1938 was when they marched in. She escaped in 1939 to England, and from there got to America and wound up drawing comics because all the boys were off at war. And she worked for Fiction House, which I have to tell you is my favorite Golden Age comic publishers. And they hired more women artists than any of the other comics publishers. And this was when all the comics publishers were hiring women artists. But she was the best of the bunch. She was the only one who was good enough to do interior stories and comics. And they were great. Look at Senorita Rio in her little Carmen Miranda outfit, dueling with the bad guy. And and she's rescuing this guy who's clinging by his fingernails to the roof. Will she save him? It's a wonderful cover. Go on.
In the show, we have 11 pieces by her, including one full story.
Yes.
All the originals?
Yes.
Oh, and a lovely story, really, about Lily, because, you know, this was Vienna. She had to escape Vienna because they would have killed her, you know, because she was Jewish. Well, the Jewish Museum in Vienna last year put on an exhibit showing 5 cartoonists who had to escape the Nazis, had to escape Vienna and earn fame and fortune in their chosen countries. And one of them was Lily, returning in triumph to the city that wanted to kill her in 1938. And what they exhibited, of course, was my collection of Lily's art. All right, we're getting a little later here. This is Tina, this little cute teenage strip by Hilda Terry. Hilda Terry was an amazing woman. It actually started in the 40s also. In fact, it debuted in the newspapers on December 7th, 1941. Now there's a date for a comic to debut. But it lasted through the 60s, through 1966. And Hilda's just amazing. Among other things, she was a fashion illustrator before she drew comics. And you can see it in her comics. And this was when the teenagers started becoming important when they started doing teenage comics. And this is out of place because it belongs in the 80s. The Wonder Woman page here, but that's by Ramona Fraden. And she did this for a special issue of DC Comics of Wonder Woman that was all women. I think it was 1988. And this is very lovely because it has Wonder Woman visiting me in my studio. And so she drew me and Wonder Woman. And I just, what a treasure. Ramona let me have the page. And it's one of my great treasures to have a page that Ramona drew with me and Wonder Woman in it.
So in the show, we blew that panel up to mural size. It's at the landing of the second floor. We also have, Ramona actually worked for DC Comics for a long time, and we're showing a page from Plastic Man and a page from Aquaman from like 1955 or something like that.
Now, Ramona is still alive and well and doing beautiful work. Even
and it's also, she turned 94. So, you know, maybe there's something about drawing comics that keeps you alive. I just want to comment on that Aquaman page. Very few women, I mean, this is just a fact, very few women drew superheroes. And one reason was it just, women, I know what you just said, Rob, about women drawing everything, but the fact is women tend not to be interested in guys with big chins punching each other out. I mean, that's just a fact. So there was a point when there was only Ramona and Marie Severan who were contributing superhero stories to the big two. And Ramona even told me she didn't like it. She did it because she got paid, but she didn't like drawing superheroes. So I was getting together an exhibit for a show in San Diego and showing the pages I wanted to show to the woman who was putting on the show. And she came to the Aquaman page and she said, but I thought this was all women. Because women just don't draw that stuff.
And she drew this very beautiful, graceful Aquaman in a period when the Batman and Superman were very sort of angular looking and not, not like that. And the Aquaman was very graceful, I thought.
There really is a difference in styles. There really is. And I think that men's comics tended to be very, very geometric and kind of sharp and, to me, cold, when women's stories tended to be rounded and warm. I really see that. Okay, this is from the 70s. And you can see, I mean, look at these two. This is Elizabeth Berube, and the middle one is by Julie Good Vibes. And they were both done in the 70s, and you can see that very, very stylish, psychedelic look to them, which was so nice, done so nicely by women in the 70s. And that last one is by me, done in 1971, and it's God Paper Dolls. And I think what it says somewhere in there is that you can be anything you want this time around.
This is terrific. I'm very, makes me wish I could see this in person. These all look like fantastic work. Was there anybody else that's part of the show that we didn't mention?
Let me comment on Elizabeth Berube, because she did this, like I say, she did this from around 1970 to 77, maybe 78, and it was in DC's Romance Comics. And at that point, she was the only woman drawing for DC. And of course, if you will pick up a romance comic from that period, you will see how different, how her work stands out from the others, because it's just so female. So
this concludes the sort of overview portion of the show. I'm going to open it up to questions, and if you have questions, we can put it in the chat window. But I'd just like to start out with one to Kim. Since you've written extensively, I'm going to stop sharing here and can go back to the gallery view of all of us. So you've written extensively on the history of comic art exhibitions in galleries and museums. What does it mean, and how does it change the context of how we look at this art and these artists to put it in a exhibit like this and put it up on the walls and sort of invite people to view it in a different way than as if we're at the newsstand and we're just picking the comic off the rack and looking at it that way?
You know, there's a valuation, you know, of recognition, you know, like, wow, this is really good. It must be good because it's being recognized like this. But another part of it is just to see other artists' work is just really important and inspiring for people. In my book, I tell a story that Charles Schulz told the De Young Museum in the 80s, where he was talking about a show that his mother took him to at the St. Paul Library in 1939. And it was, Charles Schulz really learned how to draw by copying all of the cartoonists that he saw in the St. Paul Pioneer, or whatever the newspaper was, like Skippy and all of those sort of strips. And this show had the originals of a lot of the art that he had tried to copy. And he was so nervous about making mistakes, but he saw all of the passion and the brushwork and all of the mistakes and the whiteout, the registration marks and all that stuff that you see. And it just completely turned his career around. He was like, saw what he was missing, you know, and I hear that story from a lot of artists that say, well, you know, I didn't realize that so-and-so was such a great artist, or, you know, I was really inspired by seeing this piece in the museum because it made me see it really differently. Also, there's just, when you see pages separately in a frame, your eye is just drawn to different things. There's an art historian named Andre Molitou that wrote a great essay in my book where he talks about the difference in how your eye is drawn to things when you see it framed. You know, like different elements just like really grab you, and it's a whole different experience to see something on the wall like that. I saw Charles Hatfield's great Kirby show at UC Northridge, and he had a whole room, he had a whole issue of Commandi on the wall, and the drawing was so incredible, and you'd go around from page to page and you'd read it, but your eye was really drawn to like different parts of the composition, and I was just taken by what a dynamic illustrator Kirby was. And I think it's true when you go around downstairs and look at the contemporary art in the show, the different ways of expression that all of the artists have. To see their real actual work is really amazing. I mean, when I opened the box and saw Emile Ferris's pieces, it was mind-blowing to see her work in real life.
Yeah, one of our attendees, Daniel, says, painted art looks easy. The originals show the work and the talent that goes into the pages. And goes on to say that years ago, Disney released the incomplete version of Beauty and the Beast with long sections just in pencil tests, and you realized that it was made by hand. And it, you know, that there is something to the medium, you know, that gets between you and, you know, that's the definition, right? It gets between you and the original expression that I think when you see it more immediately and just looking at the pages. In hanging this show, Kim, was there anything, any, you know, techniques or any big murals or something to create immersion? You mentioned that you blew up the panel, the Ramona Trina panel. Were there other examples of sort of strategies to make the comic art more engaging or more relevant to a gallery environment?
You know, some of the artists worked in color. Willie Mendez, the artist that actually was collaborated with Trina in a lot of early 70s comics, has a new comic out called Queen of the Cosmos. And she has this gorgeous, big psychedelic painting that we put on the back wall to like kind of draw people through the gallery. And it also has 4 pages from her like sort of feminist reimagining of the creation story, which is pretty mind-blowing. But you know, I tried to like use color in strategic places. I had to think hard about how to show Carol Tyler's pieces because they're not like flat on a wall. They're like saw blades and wood strips and stuff. So, you know, there was a lot of thought about how to best show those things, and also to make sure that they're secure, you know, because it's New York City and you can't like just leave stuff out. So, you know, but there's not a lot of blow-ups in the show. It's mostly real art. There's only, there's a blow-up of the Ramona Fradon, and there's a detail of Colleen Doran's Wonder Woman when you first walk in, but otherwise it's all original artwork.
Yeah, I mean, when you're doing Kirby or one of these people that their visuals rely on this really big immersive thing, it gives you some strategies to do that. If you're looking at stuff that's more intimate and more sort of storytelling oriented, probably the best thing to do is just let the art speak.
It depends a lot on the size of the room you have too. I mean, the society has really got like the perfect sort of wall ratio for showing smaller works like this, you know, like when you really need blow-ups and stuff like that is when you're in like a big art museum with a huge gallery that's really made for showing like giant paintings, because it just gets swallowed. You need to do something, you know, but the society's walls are great.
So
Rob, what you said, quoting that that other person who said something about you can, from the Disney pencils, that you realize it's done by hand. That's kind of, you know, like kids read comics, and not so much now when artists are stressed, but in general, and even people who are not big comic fans read comics, and they don't even think about whether it's done by hand. You know, they don't think about the artists. And this shows you that it's real live people, that it's real artists who are drawing this, not some comic machine. And that's one thing about exhibiting comics, the originals.
No doubt. And also, I mean, especially when you're rediscovering the work of people whose work hasn't been exhibited or hasn't been seen very much in public, it kind of invites you to think about what their lives were like or what their careers were like. Because Trina, when you were talking about how, you know, the canon of these male comic artists, a lot of it was established because they worked on characters that have become these household names. And they had these long careers where they would go from project to project, and they would keep getting fans and things. You think of somebody like Lily Renee, who obviously she worked in the business, she was very accomplished, or some of these other artists whose draftsmanship was so exquisite, and yet, you know, what were some of their career paths? Did they have longevity in the industry, or did they move on to other things? What happened?
Is that a question for me?
It
yes,
is
their careers, yes, they did very well. Of the flapper artists that I show in the exhibit and that I have in my book, The Flapper Queens, Ethel Hayes kept drawing well through the 50s, and so did Virginia Houget, who is one of the three big flapper queens. She even had pages in romance comics of the late 40s. Nell Brinkley drew until she died. Gladys Parker, I have a book on Gladys Parker coming out in January. She drew until the year before she died. She died in '66. She drew, finally stopped drawing in 1965. I mean, their careers were great. It's just that people don't know about them because they haven't been written about. I mean, that really is what it comes down to, Rob. No other reason. They haven't been written about.
So on that, Elise writes, thank you so much for being here. Can you please comment on Anne Brewster as a comic artist? I saw her unpublished romance comic in the show and was enamored with her work.
She's a wonderful artist. I wish I knew more about her, but she did a lot of comic work. She also drew for Classics Illustrated, and she did a lot of romance comics. I don't know much about her, unfortunately, but I love her work. And, you know, if I can find it, I collect it.
And Danny Fingeroth writes, is there any of Marie Severan's work in the show? particularly her amazing superhero and humor material.
I think there's a page that I own. Am I right?
Yeah, we have one page from Not Brand Ick that we're showing. That's a spoof of the Marvel bullpen, like sort of Mad Magazine style. It's a great page.
She's so versatile because her humor work was really loose and funny and endearing. And then when she went on Hulk, and she could do superheroes if they wanted her to do superheroes. An interesting figure, but then largely had production roles through a lot of her career.
You know, that's the trouble. You know, they had her coloring. I mean, she was such a great artist. They had her coloring, they had her doing production, and she never complained. She never complained, and I think she should have, of course, but those were different times. I would have, you know.
Let me see if, I think there's another question in the Q&A channel. Oh, that was, sorry, that was from Elise. Are there any other questions from the audience? We'll be continuing the conversation for another couple of minutes. Sorry. Oh, Michael has a process question for Kim. In what ways does your new comic art and museums book relate to your curation of this exhibition?
I think it filled a gap. In my book, you know, there's lots of there's lots of writings and catalogs about shows about male cartoonists, and I included an essay by Trina that was sort of the text of her Masters of American Comics talk that she gave. And, you know, tried to talk about women cartoonists as much as I could. Obviously, I have a lot of women contributors, but, you know, in the beginning, women weren't really included in a lot of these shows very much. There were a few women early on in like the 30s and 40s. There were a lot of shows of comics in the museums, but there were only 2 or 3 women that would show up regularly in these that were illustrators for like the New Yorker or Saturday Evening Post or something like that. And we didn't see women start coming back into shows again until, I don't know, like the 90s. So there's a big gap in there. So I hope that I'll be able to do a second book and be able to include a lot more women, including this show.
So
I'm curious, who were some of the women who were in the early shows in the 30s?
Sorry, I can't right now.
So we're just about coming to the end of the hour here, which seems
I'll email you.
Thank you. Michael has another question to everyone. Oh, here's another.
Oh, let's see.
Oh,
sorry. This is a
oh
separate
no.
thing that I'll address off.
Does one of us have a fly on our hair?
No, that's it's all good. What I'd like to do, since we're coming to the end of the hour, which seems like a good place to stop, and Kim, how long is this show going to be up, and how can people take a look, come in that maybe aren't in New York?
It's up until the 24th, so not much longer.
Is there going to be an exhibit catalog or something that people can order?
No. There are on my website, neuroticraven.com, there are exhibit photos, and there's a page that has some details about the show and bios of all of the artists with samples of their work. Next Monday night at the same time, I'm doing a panel with 5 of the artists. So that'll be a discussion about, you know, their artwork and contemporary art. And
people can register for that at the Society of Illustrators.
Yeah.
And then Trina, you have a new book coming out in January?
Yes, in January. We very quickly went by, when you were showing the slides, very quickly passed by a Gladys Parker panel, but it was kind of out of a context, so I didn't talk about it. But Gladys Parker drew a very famous character named Mopsy that I think people of a certain age will remember, because Mopsy went from 1937 to 1965. What's this? Oh, Monday's Artist Talk. And she was just an amazing person. I mean, Gladys Parker had to have her own book because it had so much to say about not just her work, but her life. The fact that besides being an incredibly successful cartoonist, she also had a fashion line throughout the 30s with her own label, the Gladys Parker label. And she was famous as a clothing designer. She made clothes for movie stars like Barbara Stanwyck and Dorothy Lamour. Excuse me. And just her own life was so fascinating. I could speak for a long time about Gladys Parker, but this book is coming out in January,
Who's
and
the
I'm
publisher?
eager to see it.
Who's
What was
publishing?
that?
Who's publishing?
Hermes Press. Hermes Press.
Oh, great.
And the Tonawanda, Gladys was from Tonawanda, New York, and the Tonawanda Historical Society is going to have a big event about Gladys when the book comes out. And I am hoping that I'm praying for a vaccine so that I can go to that event.
Well, I think that everybody enthusiastically joins you in those hopes and prayers. On that note, let me thank Trina and Kim for the fantastic conversation, the Society of Illustrators for providing a venue for this great show and for our conversation. And thank you to everybody that joined us in this webcast. My name is Rob Salkowitz. You can follow me at Rob Salk on Twitter. As I said, I write regularly for Forbes, for ICV2, which is the trade publication of the comics industry, and also occasionally for Publishers Weekly. And please do get Kim's book. It's terrific, full of tremendous contributions. And as I said, I'm very proud to be numbered among those folks.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Rob, for having us.
Thank you so much. Let me turn this back to Lindsay if there's anything final to go. But thanks everybody.